that I think,
So,
you know.
Ed,
Hey, Ed, let's interrupt you really quickly, and you can continue.
A couple of news organizations confirming it, including the AP.
Yeah.
Breaking news: Kamala Harris picks Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as running mate as she looks to boost the Democratic ticket in the Midwest.
For our viewers,
I was going to say, to Ed's point, he sounds like, you know, a football coach talking about very progressive issues. He brings to the table a background that is very down to earth and connected with people and their daily lives as a former teacher.
You know, it's an interesting pick. I think, ironically enough, people have looked at him as the safe pick. I would disagree. This opens up a number of issues for the Democratic ticket to now defend. But this is, it looks like, according to the Associated Press, and we're still waiting at NBC News to confirm it, but the Associated Press and other news organizations, Ed, have in fact said it's Walz. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a good pick, to be honest. I mean, I think Shapiro would have been as well, but you know, he talks in a way that isn't perceived by Republicans or non-Democrats in general to be looking down on them. He talks in a very engaging, everyday manner, a very practical, very common sense. You know, he's a hunter. You know, he shoots. He's got a pretty normal family. He's from a blue-collar background. He served in the military. I think it's very difficult to paint him as Kamala's equivalent of J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance was, as Governor Walz put it, a weird choice who talks in weird ways. Walz is the unweird. So I think it's going to be pretty hard. And I would echo what Jonathan said earlier. You know, the first principle of selecting a running mate is to do no harm. I don't think he's going to do any harm. I don't think this is going to be a 10-day story. Why did Harris pick Walz? I think it's going to be a 3-day story, and it's going to be a united Democratic Party, and he'll be a popular choice. He communicates in a very effective, very unfake way.
Yeah, and to add to Ed's point, as we bring in Claire McCaskill to this conversation, nobody better than Claire, Tim Walz also brings maturity to the ticket without being too old, which I guess people talk about a lot these days, especially on the Trump side, looking as old as he has lately. At the same time, this is a younger ticket with enough wisdom and maturity to bring to the table their ideas and their vision for the country. Claire, your thoughts on Tim Walz?
I think it's a great pick. Listen, he grounds her in a way that really matters, especially for all of the country that is not on the coast. This is not a coastal elite guy. This is not an Ivy Leaguer. This is a guy who says things like, you'd lose your hair too if you supervise a high school lunchroom for 20 years. This is a guy who can give you advice on how to fix your car. This is a guy who has served 25 years in the National Guard and who has served his country admirably. He has been in Congress. He knows the levers of power in government and how to wield them. He's been a governor in a state that, while, yes, Minnesota is blue, but it's not bright blue. I remember a time when Republicans were getting elected statewide in Minnesota. And he does have this way of communicating. I think what really made the difference here is he's joyful when he's on the attack. He almost, like does it with a wink and a smile and a sense of humor when he is going after these guys. And that's what Kamala Harris needs. She needs somebody who will keep the lightness in her campaign, who will be a happy warrior. And that is Tim Walz. He is one happy warrior. I think he's a terrific pick.
Yeah, and also adding to that, joyful in his approach, I think you're absolutely right, Claire. He seems to almost have a twinkle in his eye when he's going after people. And let's just put to the table here that we're hearing this from multiple news sources. Apparently the phone call hasn't been made. The actual conversation hasn't been had yet, but this is the choice. Yeah. But it was down to two amazing choices.
Yeah.
And ultimately, some of these decisions have to be made in terms of who you feel most comfortable with, who you think you can work with, who you think will be the best fit on your team. That's stuff that, can only be made by the candidate
Well,
herself.
exactly. Candidate has to make the decision herself. And I will tell you, the candidate that I'm most comfortable with is a candidate that helps me win Pennsylvania in 2024. So let us hope, Jonathan Lemire, that those outside of Pittsburgh loves Tim Walz. So talk about Walz.
Yeah,
Let's talk about how the decision not made, the road not taken. Josh Shapiro, a guy that has approval ratings in the 60s in Pennsylvania, the must-win state for both campaigns, and also the one who was considered the front runner for a very long time. But then there was a backlash, and we heard backlash. There was a very public campaign against Josh Shapiro, and a really ugly whisper campaign against Josh Shapiro, and it's unfortunately that's something that is now hanging over this choice.
No question there,
Jonathan.
Joe. Josh Shapiro was considered the governor of Pennsylvania, the heavy favorite going into this process. As we mentioned earlier in the show, he was seen as someone who would run for president had President Biden opted to drop out sooner than he did. And he was perceived to be Vice President Harris's top choice and would have, many people believe, delivered Pennsylvania. But clearly the Harris campaign felt if indeed Tim Walz is the pick. And we should note, the reporting here that the governor of Minnesota has not yet officially been notified that he is the choice, but there are people around Governor Shapiro who have been told that he is not the choice. So we can sort of put two and two together there as to where this is going at this moment. But there are indeed, this is going to be there will be some second guessing about this choice because of the electoral prize that Pennsylvania is. We're already seeing from Republicans some attack lines about Governor Walz, most importantly invoking the 2020 riots there, the Black Lives Matter riots after the George Floyd death. We're seeing that. We're seeing that people have already, Governor DeSantis of Florida has already deemed Harris Walz the most liberal ticket in history. But I think there are selling points to this pick as well. He's a former school teacher. He's the National Guardsman. He was in the House. He was governor. He has a very impressive resume. He is the guy who coined weird. That phrase, which Democrats have used so effectively against Trump and Vance and Republicans, that has taken off in the last 10 days or so, is from the mouth of Governor Walz on our air, calling them weird. So she is an effective communicator. He's a talented politician, no doubt. And they think that will help them in some rural areas, cut down margins of defeat. But we know, because we had Steve Kornacki on yesterday, that wasn't really the case in Minnesota itself. Walz has a libertarian streak. He is someone who I think will be good on the stump as an attack dog in a kindly manner. But there are going to be some who believe that Josh Shapiro should have been the pick.